I'm Nicole Auerbach. He's Joshua Perry. And we just watched a thrilling game between Oregon and Ohio State. The Ducks win. The fight came down to the final second. So, Joshua, first thoughts on that result and the way that Oregon won that game?
Well, first off, I think the story for me is Dillon Gabriel and the way that he performed, because there were questions, right? Like we saw some of the red zone turnovers. How much were they going to incorporate his legs? And they did it when it was timely for them to do it. He was phenomenal at finding the open wide receivers, which I'll get to why they were so open here in a second. The offensive line protected him. He evaded pressure when he was under pressure. Like I thought he played a really good game. Defensively for Oregon, like they gave up a ton of yards. They gave up yards on the ground. They gave up yards through the air. But when you have an offense that was playing the way that their offense did, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I thought Dillon Gabriel was fantastic, right? Like he was someone that we thought was going to be a Heisman Trophy contender coming into the season. He had those red zone interceptions the last couple of weeks, and that was cleaned up. He had that long run that helped Oregon go ahead late. I thought he was fantastic, and just the variety in their offense. All of it was working, right? They were running the ball, they were throwing the ball, and it was just a really impressive win. And you could tell from Dan Lanning at the end of the game how emotional he was, because he had not had a top 5 win.
No.
He was 0-2 entering this game against top 5 opponents. The atmosphere was incredible. There were a lot of mistakes and decisions and pivotal moments on both sides. And Oregon was able to come out, even though they had 12 men on the field in one of the final moments. There were so many things that this could have gone differently at the end, but you could just see it was a huge relief for Dan Lanning and company afterwards.
I mean, they overcame a ton, right? Like early on in the game, you had the botched hold on was that extra point attempt?
Yep.
And then they had a missed field goal. You mentioned the 12 men. They had the interception that was ruled to not be an interception. Didn't even take a look at it. Like all of these things that you have to overcome. And playing at home certainly is much easier to do that. But regardless, when you're playing against a team as good as Ohio State, you typically can't afford to have mistakes like that. But Oregon just kept on fighting in that game.
Absolutely. So what did we learn about the Ducks in this game?
They're resilient.
Yeah.
Like that's one of the biggest things I think that we could have learned about them in this football game. I had questions about their defense. I was looking at some plays that they had earlier in the year, and I'm like, was the intensity there? Is the effort there? How bought in are they? They didn't have Birch out there, which I thought could be a huge swing in the game, but it's a resilient team.
Yeah, I also thought we had been wondering about that offensive line, right? Early in the season, they were giving up more sacks than they had all of last season, but Dillon Gabriel was protected. He was able to get the job done. They were able to bully Ohio State at times in the defensive front. They were able to run the ball when they wanted to. I just think that this was the Oregon team that some, like myself, picked to win a national championship, a team and a quarterback that was experienced, had won games like this. He won Red River last year in a game also where he had to do a lot by his legs. And he was the experienced quarterback that made the decisions that he needed to at the end. So let's get into the other quarterback. Will Howard, the game ends with him running out the clock.
Yeah.
They don't even get the ball in the end zone. And I feel like we have to start there, because we had wondered, is Will Howard good enough to win this game? And not all of it comes down to him, but that's how it ends. So you feel it for Will Howard. You feel for him because that was just a heartbreaking way to end. And he knew immediately that he had used up too much time. But the question is, what did Ohio State not do well enough to lose this game? Why did they lose?
All right. So clearly I'm very sad right now recapping this game. And this is where it gets really sad. So let's talk about Will Howard for a sec, because I know he's going to catch a lot of heat. That last play is unacceptable, especially for a veteran quarterback. And he's probably trying to get as many yards. They had a timeout. I understand what's probably going through his head, but you just can't do it. 326 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions on 80% completion for the game. He was very efficient. He looked very confident. I thought he handled the crowd pretty well. There were some pre-snap penalties, but typically it looked like he was trying to operate that offense from a place of like, I've been in some big games before, which he had won a Big 12 championship. I'm there for that. So that was unfortunate. The play leading into that, where you're coming off the penalty, the clock is rolling and the offensive line is not set. He's trying to get guys lined up. Like those 2 plays from a game management standpoint are things that cannot happen, especially for a team that's trying to win a championship. The biggest issue to me, though, you gave up 496 yards. The Ohio State defense did. That is terrible. And you can go through, like, we could talk about scheme where I thought maybe some of it could have been better, untimely blitzes, like appropriate play calling. We can have that conversation. There were also some guys out there who I know are very good players that did not look like great players tonight. And I think that's going to be the hardest thing that they have to grapple with, because now you're looking at some of these guys, some of them had returned, And it's almost like there's a mental block in trying to win a game like this.
So I think the defense is going to be the main thing everyone's going to be talking about coming out of this, because against inferior competition, Ohio State had the best defense in the country statistically. And I think we all felt really good about them coming into this game because we thought they were the more complete team, that they had actually elevated both sides of the ball and were ready for a game like this. And then Oregon did things that we hadn't seen out of them. They played the most complete game that we've seen out of them. Their defense also gave up a lot of big plays, right? Like I think Ohio State's offense overall, until those last couple of plays, did a really nice job. Did a lot of things well.
They gained 467 yards in that game. So it's not
offense was not the problem.
Yeah, either defense was like lights out, but 500 yards it's really hard to overcome if you're trying to win a game, especially on the road.
And Ohio State was supposed to be the better defensive team. And you were also going up against a quarterback who'd been making mistakes in the red zone recently. Again, this is a team that had offensive line issues. None of that showed up in this game. So do we think that we will see a rematch of this game in the Big Ten Championship? Do we think both of these teams are going to make the college football playoff?
Yeah, I think, yes, we'll see the rematch. Yes, both the teams are going to make it. So we're sitting there at the end of the game, and somebody said in the screening room that whoever loses this game should not drop behind Penn State, which is likely to happen. But I would tend to agree with that. Right. Like, I don't think after watching that game that I think Ohio State is going to lose to Penn State, for example, who's on their schedule.
Right.
After watching that game, I think Oregon's got every opportunity to go 12-0 in the regular season. So, like, yes, are there some issues with either team for certain? Like, are there things that cannot happen if you're trying to pursue a championship? Yes, but like, these were definitely the two best teams in the Big Ten that battled it out.
They're definitely two of the best teams in the country.
Yeah.
And I think that game living up to that height and giving us a 1-point finish, that solidifies all of that for me. I think what you have with the winner with Oregon here is, like you said, clear path to an undefeated regular season and a very clear path to the college football playoff, right? Like, we can probably pencil them in the Big Ten championship games. They'll be playing for a first round bye. And obviously Ohio State is still one of the best teams in the country. It's going to be fascinating to see how they respond to their first loss of the season as Ryan Day continues to look for those big wins. We'll have more with Rushing the Field later this week. He's Joshua Perry. I'm Nicole Auerbach.